Well, here we are in Florida again. Uh, we live near the water. We live near the beach. Life is wonderful. The coronavirus is almost gone, but is it? We have the Delta virus that's hanging out there, a worse version they're finding out. Did you get your vaccine, folks? If you didn't, you should. That's just taking all the chances off the table that you're going to end up under a ventilator under the latest Delta virus, which is a pretty serious thing. Politically, there's another virus out there, a bacteria called the red tide, or it's called Carina brevis, Brevis, Karena. And it comes from algae blooms um, or creates brevetoxins. When it hits sometimes lightly. Historically, it used to be a minor thing for maybe at worst 2 3 weeks, maybe a month, and it would go away. It would die off and go away. But about 2 years ago, we had a period when this red tide hit really seriously, and it was impossible to go to the beaches. People who had condos on Siesta Key were going to St. Petersburg because the red tide wasn't so bad up there. It was impossible to go to the beach with the odors of the dead and dying fish floating out there just 100 feet into the waves. And certainly getting into the water with that condition, with that bacteria, was kind of risky. There's a thing called a flesh-eating, flesh-eating necrotizing. And what that is, this virus or this bacteria can actually eat you alive, literally, to cause swelling and so forth. And there's another product of infections that it's called cellulitis, if you've ever had that. But anyway, the red tide coronavirus only gets to be serious if it's fed. And what feeds it are algae blooms. And the algae blooms create what is called a brevetoxin. Now, this is important because what just recently happened in a little old place just north of Manatee County called Piney Point. It's a phosphate plant up there. Mosaic was a company that was up there, and different companies took it over, went bankrupt. And the state's offered to do a $100 million cleanup. What are they going to clean up? Piney Point broke the holdings, the the phosphate cones, they call them. They're nothing more than reservoirs. They're pretty high, and they're lined with plastic. Well, in Piney Point, just recently, earlier this couple of months, started leaking 170 million 170 million gallons of waste that had been stored inside this holding tank, this holding mound. And what does that do when it gets out? No, it's not what it does. It's what it's done. It's already gotten out. And who's in charge of that? The Florida Department of Environmental Pollution. The state had money to close Piney Point. They didn't do it. The state, the company, the county allowed through the county this to happen, and allow more waste to be built up in Piney Point, and this thing has gotten into the water, into the Gulf. History. 2 years ago, I mentioned this happened under Governor Scott. Same kind of thing. Governor Scott told the Department of the Army Corps of Engineers, that's what it was, that Lake Okeechobee could drain into the Gulf instead of just out into the Atlantic. Why was that a problem? Why did that become a problem? Because that same kind of algae bloom that didn't happen in the Atlantic side, the east side of Florida, flowing there. The water's deep, and it flushes everything away. Very strong surfs, what have you. None of that's true really in the Gulf side. It's shallower, it's not deep, it's warm, it blooms more readily in the Gulf, and that's exactly what it did. It lasted 2 years. It killed the tourism business, generally speaking, and all of the keys, especially the Sarasota's Siesta Key and Bird Key and Lido Key and Longboat Key and Casey Key. All these keys relying on tourism, and then the city of Sarasota, who wants to stay where the odor is too strong to walk around without holding your breath if you can, and that's how it was. Well, here we are all over again. This is north of Sarasota. It's in Manatee County, and now you've got this circumstance of Karina Brevis doing this. But the other thing that's out there as well, and it has happened to people, is the flesh-eating bacteria, necrotizing. Necrotizing tachytis. It's hard to pronounce that. So you got this thing. What does that mean? People end up with losing their legs, their limbs. This flesh starts to be eaten, and they don't survive this. They die. It's a miserable death. Doesn't happen often, but at least they don't know what caused it in every case. But it's a dangerous thing. So the Florida Department of Environmental Pollution had the money to close Piney Point, but the company, the state, and the county allowed this costly thing. They were warned about. The Army Corps of Engineers warned this is going to happen in 2008. Now, folks, the economic thing that happens here is if a community is desirable for the sunshine and the good weather, the beaches, and suddenly the beaches are no longer available, that's an economic mess or disaster, as the case may be. And now it turns out this Governor DeSantis, who's been sitting on this, remember, he's in charge of who's in the Florida Department of Environmental Pollution. He's in charge of appointing those people. They're not elected to that position. They're appointed by the governor. Understand that. So he has questionable, dirty hands here, possibly. The other thing there's another thing that's going to haunt him, but I won't go into that now. But Karina brevis and algae blooms creating brevetoxin will make our beaches impossible if this thing gets rolling. And there's dead fish already north of in Manatee County and Piney Point area, out into the Gulf, into Tampa Bay, and it's going to, once it gets going, and the warm weather gets hotter, which it will for another couple of months, it's going to get difficult. And the tourism is going to go through from July 4th, excuse me, and Labor Day. Those are still two good holiday periods for tourism. People up in the south come south, and further south come people up north still come down here. That may all dry up and shut down. That means money. That means houses. People were investing in new housing. What happens to the housing market? So the effect of the red tide is no small thing, and it's a frightening thing, and it's a danger of an economic disaster. But if people die, businesses die because of it, those effects are very possible, and that falls on the hands of the lead officer in the state government, the governor himself, Governor DeSantis. So if there's blood that's out there, it's on his hands. It just is. It's not. It was on Scott's hands, but Scott was at the end of two terms, and so when Scott went out, it didn't matter much. He was well beyond losing an election because he was not going to have to run again. But DeSantis has got to run again if he's going to be a two-term governor. And that's what could be in peril. But another thing he could be is in peril for is some of the other things he's doing, which I'll get into in another conversation with you. But if you think this is a small thing, the red tide, those of you who've been around a while know that this is not a natural kind of occurring thing. This is induced into a worse circumstance because of Piney Point, the phosphate plant the Army Corps of Engineers warned about in 2008. I want to thank you for watching and listening. If there's more to learn, there's more to learn. I'll be glad to educate myself a little more on this. But I do have some kind of background. I was in the park board of Sarasota County for 5 years back in the 90s, and it came up then. It comes up every year. But when you have a spill like Piney Point, or you have a outflow like was in Lake Okeechobee that the governor directed, this is negligence, carelessness. And this is exactly what Piney Point's about. This governor is responsible. This falls on his table in his service as governor. He's responsible. He's the point of last return. He's the last one you blame. So his administration may have to eat this, not in the best way. I want to thank you. We'll see you again. Welcome to the Edge.